Yeah, in this video, what I'd like to do is just go over a whole bunch of things that relate to text in ScrapPage. So I'm going to ramble a little bit here, maybe doing some of this stuff, but I just wanted to show you how text and titles work. So let's start a new project here. We'll just make it have some color background so we can stand the text off against it. Okay. So you all know that you add a text box simply by going up here where it says under add text box, and that comes in. Now this is the default size, this rectangle up here, and it defaults to a size, or that is the dimensions of the rectangle. This is the default size for text. It's 48 point. Now some fonts will render fine at 48 points where others won't. But it really doesn't matter, because when you type in a text, let's just say testing here, and we tell it to auto size, it's going to auto size to whatever fits in that rectangle. Now it's going to make that selection based on what fits both vertically as well as horizontally. So as you can see here, the vertical dimension is what limited the size of the text, in this case to 51 points, that testing would fit in there. Now, conversely, I could make this thing like this and make this text box be very tall, and you can see that the 51 points is attempting to do various wrapping here because it's not resizing itself unless I tell it to. But if I told it to auto size again, you would see now the testing jumps down to something significantly smaller. And it does that because now the horizontal dimension rather than the vertical dimension is what's controlling the size of the text. In this case, it comes down to 31 points. Okay, so given that you can do all of that, what happens if it bleeds through, for instance? Okay, now as you can see here, let me give you a bigger one here. We'll auto size to here. Okay, so this is 102 points that it auto sized to fit in that rectangle, and that size was determined by the actual size of the font. Now it's not necessarily the top of what you see here, but it's the actual size of the font definition. And that allows for things like accent marks and everything else that could be up here, that they're not necessarily in the wording that you choose, but the font is what they call kerned to allow for that. So anyway, you can see that this one is determined, its size is determined by the vertical dimension of the rectangle, not the horizontal dimension. But nonetheless, given that it does that, if we shrink it past, you'll see that it just starts disappearing as it goes. That's just the way it renders. And if you ever get that sort of situation with your text, all you have to merely do is drag the box a little bit bigger. It really doesn't make any difference how big you make this box. You could make it that big, but when you click on it and tell it to render the text into your layout, it just looks the same as if the box was smaller. So if the box was up here. Now you can enter a lot of text and it will word wrap the text on down, and it'll go in accordance with whatever font and whatever size you've selected. There is a minimum size on the auto select, so the auto select will never go smaller than 16 points. Although you can manually make it smaller, I limit out the auto sizing to 16 points. The other question that comes up a lot is one about fonts. Now you'll see here I have just a few fonts up here that I have selected. When ScrapPage first opens, it defaults to like 3 fonts, and that is Arial, I think Tahoma, and Times Roman is the ones that I defaulted to. So how do you get other fonts in there if you want them? Well, up here under Tools, or I'm sorry, under Actions, there is a menu item called Font Manager. And when that opens up, it will show on the left side over here all of the fonts that are on your system. Okay, so you can see these are the fonts that happen to reside on my system. Now, if you pick one of them, it'll show down here in this little text box what that font looks like. So this one, however you pronounce that, Garamando Pro Dot Italic, looks like that, whereas their regular font looks like that. Algerian looks something like that. So you can keep going and find fonts that you want. Now when you do, let's just pick something like Century. I don't know, it looks a whole lot like a Times Roman font. But once you find a font that you want, all you do is you move over here, and this little arrow button showing here will put it into your preferred fonts folder, or preferred fonts list. Now, the preferred fonts is what's going to show up in the font manager or in the font selection on the text box editor. Now, I do this because rather than have all of these fonts, you're probably like me, you've got all these fonts that are on your system and you use 6 of them. So anyway, that's what I did, is I made it so that you had these preferred fonts. Now, if you ever want to go and get any more, you just do what I just did here, because now if I go over here, you will see that even though it wasn't there before, now if I look at fonts, Century is there. So I can apply the Century font if I want to. Okay? So that's the way the font management works in ScrapPage. It gives you the opportunity to bring in the fonts that you use repeatedly over and over and over again. Now, all fonts don't necessarily render the same, and I'll give you an example here. One of the fonts I use a lot is Scriptina, and if you click on Scriptina, you'll find that, gee, it barely showed up. What's going on? Well, that's because some fonts, and Scriptina is one of them, have a lot of vertical kerning, as they call it, and you don't really see it until you make the box a little bit bigger. So like in this case, if that's all the box size was and I auto-sized it, it'll fit. But when I had it larger, like so, and I auto-sized it, you can see I got a lot of dead space up here before it even begins to show up. So if I made the font box that size with 129, I don't see anything at all. So anyway, that's good to know that you sometimes, if you don't see something and it's not showing up, just drag this grow handle down and you say, oh, there it is. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Now, the other options that you can do with fonts is you can underline them if you want, or you can outline them rather. It'll default to black. Let me give this font a color so we can see what we're doing here a little differently. So you can see now it's kind of got this rose color with a black. Now you don't necessarily want to default it to black. I mean, you might want to go to something a little bit darker, something like this, and you say, okay, fine, that looks pretty cool. Now I've got a darker rose with a lighter rose inset of the font itself. In addition to that, you can make it bold if you want. Some fonts lend themselves nicely to italicizing, so you can italicize it if you want, and you can underline it if you want to do that. Now, some fonts don't underline very well, and Scriptina clearly is one of them, but some do. So anyway, just so you know how that works. Now, what's this other stuff that we can do? Well, let's blow this up a little bit. You'll notice that it stays centered, and that's because we have this thing set to center justify. You can also right justify, which will bring the text over to here. And that is quite often something that you want to do, particularly if you're doing a lot of text. You know, if you've got a good bit of journaling that you're adding to your layout. I find that almost always for titles, I leave them in the center, and that way, you know, I can move it around, put it wherever I want, and I don't really think too much about where it is. Generally speaking, though, you know, titles lend themselves well to centering, and journaling can go either way, either right justified or center justified. So those are some of the things you probably really want to know about texting. The other issue, and maybe you haven't tried it yet, is this Make Image button. Now, what does that do? Well, this takes this text. Right now, you can see that this text doesn't grow with the rectangle. Right? It just sits there at the same size. It just repositions itself based on what kind of justification you have. So, but you can say, hey, I want to take this text and I want to make an image out of it. And it tells you that this is not a reversible process, so you better be sure you spelled this correctly and whatever else you're going to do. But tell it to go ahead and yes. Now it's an image. It's no longer text. I can't edit the text anymore. It's turned it into an image. What I can do, though, is I can put it on a crop rectangle, something about like this. And I'll crop it out. And now I've got this thing and I can move it around. But more importantly, I can grow it anywhere I want. I can grow it that way just by dragging the handle like you would any other image. Or if I held the shift key down, I can change its skewing. So I can make it look like this, I can make it look like that, I can make it look like anything I want. So those are that's another interesting thing you can do with text, particularly if you're using it for a title. You probably would never do that with any serious journaling you were putting in, but you can do that with titling, and you can always bring it back to its size, just by coming back up here, something like this, and there it is, and it's back to where it started. So I just wanted to let you know that this is kind of the way that some of the tricks of the trade with texting rather, that you can do in ScrapPage and make some really cool image or text titling and things that would draw attention. Oh, by the way, in case you didn't know it, you can also put shadows on text if you want to, so that makes it pop off the page a little bit. Titling can be can look pretty good when you bring it off the page like that sometimes. It depends on the density that you want to show on your, as to how pronounced it is and how sharply you want the width of the shadow to be, and you just play around with it until you get something you like. So anyway, I thought I'd make this quick video about texting, and I'll try to figure out a few other things here that might be good for me to make these how-to little subtle videos, just to help y'all guys out with anything you're trying to do in your projects. Okay, so until the next time, this is Dave. Bye-bye.